The stranger seemed harmless at first, but something felt off. It began like any other day. I was running errands, my mind preoccupied with the mundane details of my to-do list. That's when I saw him, a man seemingly lost and in need of directions. He seemed harmless enough, his demeanor polite, his voice soft-spoken. Yet an unsettling feeling gnawed at the edges of my awareness. His eyes, a piercing blue, held a strange intensity. Still, I pushed aside my reservations. He explained he was new in town, his phone dead, and he needed directions to a remote address. I hesitated, that uneasy feeling returning, but his insistence and seemingly genuine gratitude convinced me. Little did I know, I was walking into a carefully constructed trap, lured by a predator hiding in plain sight. His home was a dark and cluttered labyrinth, mirroring his mind. The house loomed before us, an imposing Victorian structure with peeling paint and overgrown ivy. As we stepped inside, the air grew thick with the smell of dust and mildew, the only light filtering in through heavy, dust-laden curtains. The interior was just as unsettling as the exterior. The furniture was draped in dusty sheets, cobwebs clung to every corner, and stacks of books and newspapers cluttered every surface. He offered me a drink, his voice echoing strangely in the silence. I declined, my senses on high alert. There was something deeply unsettling about this place, a palpable sense of wrongness that sent shivers down my spine. His eyes, those piercing blue eyes, followed my every move, and I knew I was in terrible danger. He lunged, and a struggle for life and death ensued. Suddenly, the mask of normalcy shattered. His demeanor shifted in an instant, his polite facade replaced by a chillingly cold rage. He lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat, his face contorted in a grotesque parody of a smile. I screamed, the sound trapped in the confines of the house. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I struggled against his grip, his superior strength pinning me to the ground. Fear, raw and primal, washed over me, threatening to consume me entirely. He spoke in hushed, menacing tones, his words a litany of madness and depravity. I knew in that moment that this man was beyond reason, beyond redemption. I had to escape. I had to survive. Reverse psychology became my only weapon. His eyes, blazing with a terrifying light, held mine captive. I knew any show of resistance would be met with brutal force. I had to think fast, outsmart the monster before me. Then, in a moment of desperate inspiration, I remembered a book I'd read about hostage negotiations. Reverse psychology. It was a long shot, a gamble with my life, but it was all I had. "You're right," I choked out, my voice trembling. "You're stronger than me, but you need to make sure I don't escape." His grip loosened slightly, his ego seemingly flattered by my words. "Tie me up," I continued, my voice gaining a semblance of steadiness. "Make sure I can't get away. Then you can do what you want." I didn't look back. I ran as if the hounds of hell were at my heels, my lungs burning, my legs screaming for respite. Bursting out of the house and into the sunlight was like stepping into another world. The normalcy of the street, the sound of children laughing in the distance, was both jarring and reassuring. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of a crowded coffee shop, the familiar aroma of coffee beans and the murmur of conversations washing over me like a soothing balm. It was then that the reaction set in. My body trembled uncontrollably, the adrenaline giving way to bone-deep exhaustion. The police arrived quickly, their faces grim as I recounted the harrowing ordeal. They combed the house, but he was gone. The only evidence of his presence was the lingering sense of dread that permeated the air. The wheels of justice, as they say, turn slowly. The police investigation dragged on, hampered by a lack of physical evidence and my own fragmented memories. I provided them with every detail I could recall, no matter how insignificant it seemed, desperate to see the man who had tormented me brought to justice. But he was a ghost, his identity as elusive as smoke. The authorities assured me they were doing everything they could, but their words rang hollow. The lack of closure, The knowledge that he was still out there, free to hurt others, was almost unbearable. My life, once filled with promise and possibility, was now defined by fear and suspicion. Then, one day, the news came. It wasn't the closure I had hoped for, not the justice I so desperately craved. It was a confirmation of my darkest fears, a chilling reminder that monsters do indeed walk among us. His face, frozen in a mugshot, stared back at me from the newspaper, his eyes devoid of remorse, his lips curled into a chillingly familiar smirk. He had been caught, but not for what he had done to me. The article detailed a string of gruesome murders, each one more horrific than the last. The victims, all young women, had been subjected to unimaginable torture before their lives were brutally cut short. The police believed he had been operating for years, his crimes escalating in brutality and depravity, and I, a survivor of his madness, had been powerless to stop him.